The 17th meeting of the 25th Council will come to order. All councilors are present this evening. We will get started with a moment of silence, and I ask that we keep in mind the family of Herb Denish, longtime active person in the city and very much involved with the planning of our city over the years. We lost Herb this week, and please keep him in mind and his family as we have a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance in English by Councilor Jones and in Spanish by Councilor Bassan. Thank you, councilors. Civic Plaza parking passes are provided for members of the public. You can obtain a parking pass from council staff at the table near the chambers entrance. Members of the public, city staff, and the media have the ability to view this meeting in person and on live streams through 4 different platforms: GovTV on Comcast Channel 16, the GovTV website, YouTube, and Zoom webinar. The live streams can also be accessed from most smartphones, tablets, and computers. This meeting is closed captioned, and you may enable your closed captioning services at this time. The video recording of this and all past council meetings remain available for viewing at any time on the council's website. Staff is available via telephone if you need help finding the videos. Please call 768-3100 for assistance during business hours, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 p.m. Council will take a break at 7 p.m. this evening if necessary. With regard to decorum, we want tonight's proceedings to be as civil and respectful as possible. Please do not make any personal attacks, and please no applause or other outbursts during the meeting. The meeting will go a lot smoother if we are respectful of one another. We have a couple of proclamations and presentations tonight, 2 of each. So we'll get started with Councilor Feeblecorn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to invite Director Charlie from the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women to come on down. We have an issue tonight that is so important that we're not going to have 1, but 2 proclamations on this issue for National Domestic Violence Month. I think most folks know that I founded an organization that works on the link between animal abuse and human violence and really works to reduce domestic violence in our community, and it's a huge issue, and we're really so thrilled to have the work of the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women. So I'm going to read the proclamation, and then I'll let you speak if you'd like. Whereas October is declared as National Domestic Violence Awareness Month as a time to acknowledge domestic violence survivors, providing a way to connect and unite individuals and organizations working on domestic violence issues while raising awareness for those issues. And whereas domestic violence is the willful intimidation, physical assault, battery, sexual assault, and or other abusive behavior as part of a systemic pattern of power and control perpetrated by one intimate partner against another, including physical violence, sexual violence, threats, economic and emotional and psychological abuse. And whereas on average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States, which equates to more than 10 million women and men in 1 year. And whereas physical, mental, and sexual and reproductive health effects have been linked with intimate partner violence, including adolescent and unintended pregnancy, miscarriage, nutritional deficiency, neurological disorders, chronic pain, disability, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder, while also having a higher risk for developing addictions to alcohol, tobacco, and drugs. And whereas 37.6% of New Mexico women and 33.3% of New Mexico men experience intimate partner physical violence intimate partner sexual violence, and/or intimate partner stalking in their lifetime. And whereas more than 4 in 5 Native women will experience domestic violence in her lifetime. Whereas these behaviors by those who cause harm are learned behaviors and have been intensified by acts of colonization and the imposition of patriarchy and foreign belief systems on Native people. Whereas the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women is committed to the ongoing healing of ourselves, our communities, and our lands. And whereas Indigenous women and girls face complex and intersectional forms of violence linked to patriarchal structures, racial and ethnic discrimination, and mutually connected types of human rights violations, at times perpetuated by state agents, including forced sterilization, disproportionately high rates of trafficking, sexual violence, forced labor, forced disappearance, and other forms of violence. And whereas the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women strives to end domestic violence so that we will honor natural, life-supporting power that includes economic partnership, negotiations and fairness, non-threatening behavior, respect, trust and support, honesty and accountability, responsible parenting, shared responsibility, sexual respect, partnership, cultural respect, and spiritual reflections. And whereas the City of Albuquerque's increased awareness of domestic violence will support critical services for prevention and assistance and encourage citizens to report abuse and seek out help, be it proclaimed that the Council, the governing body of the City of Albuquerque, hereby recognizes October as National Domestic Violence Awareness Month in the City of Albuquerque and encourages citizen advocacy for survivors. Director Charlie?
Thank you, Counselor. Oh, does this turn on? No? Oh, it is? Oh, there we go. Thank you. On the behalf of the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women, our members, our board, and our staff, Counselor Tammy Fieberkorn, thank you, for honoring our work, uplifting our mission, and joining us in ending violence in Native communities. The Coalition is a survivor-led organization focused on freeing our communities from violence. We believe that that days of healing are ahead of us, that our best days as Indigenous survivors lie in front of us. And that begins with advocacy. And good advocacy begins with visibility. And we are honored to be seen today and the entire month of October for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director. We really appreciate all the work you do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Charlie. The second proclamation with regard to Domestic Violence Awareness Month. May I have Ms. Teresa Garcia and Iris Ward please come up. They are both with New Mexico Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and they will be accepting the proclamation today. And I'll be reading the proclamation. Whereas domestic violence is a significant social problem and directly impacts individuals and systems in every community across New Mexico, the United States, and the world. Whereas in the state of New Mexico alone, 37.6% of women and 33.3% of men have experienced violence perpetrated by an intimate partner in their lifetimes. And whereas in the state of New Mexico, a child is present at 1 out of every 4 domestic violence incidents, and the majority of these children are under the age of 12. And whereas children who grow up in violent homes are believed to be abused and neglected at a higher rate than the nationwide average, and these children's development and ability to function well in school can be negatively impacted throughout their lifetime. And whereas household pets are more likely to experience neglect and abuse in homes where domestic violence is present, and as many as 48% of domestic violence survivors will delay leaving their abusive partners out of concern for their pets' welfare, and whereas domestic violence service providers play a critical role in mitigating both the short and long-term impacts of trauma while building resilience in families, and whereas New Mexico has prioritized a focus to develop, train, coordinate, and oversee a coordinated community response teams within the New Mexico CADV to assist in developing and enhancing coordinated community response, to bring together efforts to promote safety for victims, and to hold offenders accountable. And whereas New Mexico's battering intervention programs work to continuously develop and improve in their ability to best work with those who cause harm, and whereas Domestic Violence Awareness Month provides an excellent opportunity at both the city and state level for citizens to learn more about preventing domestic violence and raise prevention awareness. And whereas Domestic Violence Awareness Month provides an excellent opportunity to reach victims and provide crucial information on how they can seek help and support. And whereas Domestic Violence Awareness Month provides an opportunity to show support and recognition for the organizations that provide critical advocacy and services to victims and survivors of domestic violence, including in LACE, Domestic Violence Resource Center, and Safe House, New Mexico. Since I am a retired law enforcement officer, many times had to deal with domestic violence in all different kinds of fashion and form. And to tell you the truth, this really is something that is very, very near and dear to my heart. We need to really be aware and talk to each other, your friends, your families, to make sure that domestic violence is not happening close to you, and more than likely it is. So this is a all-out call out to make sure that we are very much aware of domestic violence. And I'd like Teresa and Iris to go ahead and say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor Luis Sanchez. At NMCADV, we work to achieve a coordinated local, regional, and statewide response to domestic violence through collaborative work, network of members, programs, and consist of domestic violence service providers and other allied organizations and individuals, such as Enlace Comunitario, Safe House New Mexico, which is one of the largest shelters here in New Mexico, as well as Domestic Violence Resource Center. Our coalition currently has 32 direct service domestic violence organizations who support survivors and their families with resources when they are ready. The coalition also provides trainings across the state of New Mexico and currently expanding nationwide. Several of our programs also offer battering intervention programs for offenders up to 52 weeks.
We understand that domestic violence is a social problem bigger than just the behavior of individuals. Therefore, our work occurs on two levels simultaneously. We help individuals recover, and we work to change the conditions that promote violence. We believe in individual and community accountability to create safer communities. It is known that in communities who speak against domestic violence, the less violence occurs. So we must continue educating our communities and working collaboratively. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilor Clarissa Peña, for your unwavering support, as well as Luis Sanchez. We really appreciate it, and every counselor, thank you so much for your support in light of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have a presentation regarding the Mortgage Finance Authority's New Mexico Housing Strategy. Isidoro Hernandez, Executive Director and CEO, MFA, and Rebecca Velarde, Senior Director of Policy and Planning, MFA, Sonia Unrao, Research and Development Manager, MFA, will present.
Good afternoon, Councilor President and council members. Thank you for having us here today to talk to you about the New Mexico Housing Strategy. I'd like to introduce Rebecca Velarde, who is right next to me here. She's our Senior Director of Policy and Planning, and she's actually has a couple more weeks with us, and she's going on to pursue another opportunity. So she is the most well-versed in our housing strategy, so some of the detailed questions you may have later, I may punt her way. Before I start on the housing strategy, for those of you that may not know, I'll tell you a little bit about MFA. I'll just take a quick minute to do that. MFA is a private quasi-governmental agency. Each state in our nation has an agency similar to ours, although they may be structured a little bit differently. We have a 7-member board. On that board, we have 3 ex officio members, which is the Lieutenant Governor, the Attorney General, and the State Treasurer. The other 4 members are appointed by the Governor on a 4-year rotating basis. We also have a Legislative Oversight Committee composed of 20 members representing the Albuquerque area. We have Representative Dixon, Senator Padilla, Representative Lewis, Senator Moores, Representative Herndon, Senator Ortiz y Pino, and Representative Roybal Caballero. We have over 36 different programs at MFA spanning the full spectrum of affordable housing, and we have 300 plus partners that we work with to deliver the services at the local level. In this last year, 2021, we were able to assist over 25,000 families with a little over $750 million. Some examples here in Albuquerque of some of the developments that we've helped fund is Highland Plaza by the Greater Albuquerque Housing Partnership. We have Nuevo Atrisco by Yes Housing, and we have the Broadway McKnight by the Albuquerque Housing Authority, and I believe you might have had Linda Bridge present to you last week. They all do a great job, and that's just an example of some of our partners. As far as our housing strategy, let me tell you a little bit about that. So we are on, I'm not sure if you have it in front of you, but this would be slide 3. So I mentioned that we have partners throughout the state. They range from nonprofits that help individuals who are experiencing homelessness, lenders and realtors to help some of the first-time home buyers achieve the dream of home ownership, local governments that support the building of affordable housing across the state. These partners all do an excellent job at establishing that foundation for having that roof over our heads and creating that strong communities and families. Through this industry, we have all these partners that do a great job, and a lot of them with various different funding sources. It has been MFA goal to bring those partners together, as we tend to function or sometimes have programs that function in a silo. And so with that in mind, we had this vision of developing a comprehensive look at affordable housing. What are the needs statewide? What are the resources? And that helps us identify all of the gaps that existed out there, and then developing a strategy to identify all of the, or to help mitigate all of the gaps that may be out there between the needs and the resources available. So in the fall of 2021, we began the development of the New Mexico housing strategy. We brought together 20 different leaders throughout the full housing spectrum from across the state to help us develop that strategy, look at the challenges, and help us put together strategies that would help cover those. So those strategies, as you see in front of you there, include, it gives us a roadmap for the partners to follow. It's a common source of communication across the state. It's practical solutions, and it brings together those big ideas to help solve those problems. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca that'll go over some of the data that we found in the housing needs study.
No applause, please.
Council President Benton, City Councilors, good evening. This is not meant for short people. Can you guys hear me? Okay, good. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our research methodology. So Izzy kind of gave the groundwork of how we decided to put this together. And we really wanted to define the problem well. So on this slide that you see, we talk about the data that we looked into. So we pulled data and analyzed it from an array of sources, everything from the census data, American Community Survey data, to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Consumer Finance Protection Bureau data, as well as HUD. And we took this data and created 3 different research briefs. The first on housing production and preservation, another on affordability, wealth building, and economic mobility, and finally, homelessness, special needs, and human services. And these research briefs really took the data and analyzed these issues statewide by county. Next slide, please. Oh, that's the right one. Thank you. But we also wanted to hear from New Mexicans themselves. So we conducted a survey which had nearly 1,400 responses, and we distributed it via the partnership model. We worked with our partners to get it out to the people that we serve. Overall, we had a very strong response from typically underrepresented people, very low-income people, people that are precariously housed, houses of people of color, people with disabilities, large households, and single parents. So this is not statistically representative of New Mexico, but it really gives an idea of these populations that we usually do not have much data on and what their housing needs are. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the challenges. Go to the next slide, please.
So this graph shows the historic building permit production by unit type between 1980 and 2020. The orange bars show single-family units, and the blue, red, and the darker blue show multifamily units, everything more than a single-family home. New Mexico generally had very strong population growth in the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000s. And it's kind of reflected here, right? So in 1980s, despite some recessionary periods, we had a lot of growth, especially in the multifamily unit sector. That growth continued in terms of building in the 1990s, and then you can kind of see where the Great Recession started, right around 2007 and 2008. And it significantly dropped off. Now, this graph is actually similar in a lot of other states. New Mexico is not alone in how housing production dropped off. What is different between New Mexico and other states is in the last couple of years, other states have picked up the housing production a lot, whereas we are just starting to see that go up. In fact, housing production was so strong in the 80s that production of multifamily units permitted during the 80s makes up nearly half of our multifamily housing stock in New Mexico. Next slide, please. Let's talk about rent growth versus change in income. This graph shows you by county rent growth, which is in the orange bars, between 2010 and 2019, and the blue stripes are AMI growth. As you can see, on nearly every county, rent growth has vastly outpaced income growth, and this really puts a burden on New Mexico households. The exceptions are Lee County, San Juan, Los Alamos, Sierra, Rio Arriba, Kauai, and Union counties. This is also reflected in the home ownership market. I don't have a graph here for that, but between December 2019 and April 2022, so right before the pandemic to a more recent date, the price of a median single-family home in New Mexico went up by 40%, whereas annually we're only seeing household income increases by 2 to 3%. Next slide, please. New Mexico has also housing condition issues. New Mexico has 40,000 units that lack complete kitchens, 40,000 that lack complete plumbing. And these are not evenly distributed. You're more likely to live in a substandard home if you're a person with disability, Native American, or a renter. And you know, a lot of substandard housing in some ways is naturally occurring affordable housing, so it's affecting lower income households much more than other types of households. 22% of our survey respondents said that their home was in fair or poor condition, and 25% of households with a member that had a disability said their home does not meet their accessibility needs. Next slide, please. When we think about housing in the future, we have to think about population trends. As I said earlier, we had really strong growth in New Mexico in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. It slowed significantly. But we need to know what kind of housing we need to build and when. So this graph, the gray bars show the proportion of our population that are 65 years of age and older, whereas the colorful lines show different age groups and the number of people in our state from those age groups. So right now, seniors make up about 18% in 2020, seniors made up about 18% of our population. By 2035, they will grow to about 21% of our population. Also, at the same time, we're going to actually see an increase in residents that are young. Young residents will go from about I don't have it here, but they'll account for 31% of our total population by 2035. So it is good for New Mexico that we have some younger people coming in, but with the older individuals becoming a larger portion of our population and younger individuals also, the number of working families, working age families, is going to decrease in the meantime. Next slide, please. So what does that mean for housing? So if we already have affordability challenges, right? But if we just want to prevent it from getting worse, I'm not saying that we get it better. If we want to prevent it from getting worse, we need to build an average of 5,100 housing units per year statewide. So right now, the last 10 years, our average in growth counties, which is places like Bernalillo, Sandoval, Los Lunas, Doña Ana, we're building about 3,300 units a year. Statewide, we're about just under 4,800. So no matter what, we have to increase production in order to prevent affordability from getting worse. Next slide, please. Let's talk about rental gaps. So the federal government says that you are housing cost burdened, which means that you pay more than 30% of your income on your housing costs. your housing cost burden, you are paying too much. So we use this data to look at the gap of households. So this map shows the rental gap for extremely low-income households. Statewide, we're short about 32,000 units, and there's nearly about 18,000 of these are in Bernalillo County. We can go to the next slide. Cost burden is also getting worse. So the light blue bars show you the cost burden rates by income level in 2010, and the darker blue shows in 2019. So if you make less than $20,000 a year, you're most likely cost burdened. But what's interesting about this graph is for middle income people. If you make between $20,000 and $50,000 a year between 2010 and 2019, the proportion of households that are cost burdened has gone up significantly. Next slide, please. Let's talk about individuals experiencing homelessness. Each year, there's an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 individuals that experience homelessness, including 9,000 children. And again, this is not equal. Native American and Black or African American residents are overrepresented. Additionally, there are about 6,500 people who experience homelessness annually that do not receive adequate services and housing to help them exit homelessness. Next slide, please. And with that overview, I'm going to turn it back over to Izzy Hernandez to go through some of the strategies to help solve this problem.
Council President, I'll wrap it up here. You'll see that there's still quite a few slides left, but I'm not going to read those in detail. I'm just going to hit some highlights, and definitely we'll be prepared to take any questions that you may have. So if you go on to the, well, actually you have the slide up. These are the 5 elements of the strategy that we'll be covering. If you go on to the next slide, this is one picture here that kind of shows you the strategies in more detail that I'll be covering, and this is by the type of housing that we'll be looking at. If you go on to this next slide here, you'll see that we have strategies and goals here. So in this particular strategy, it's to create more housing. You'll see several goals under this. This one here addresses increasing production. So part of that is prioritizing existing resources to develop more housing and more affordable housing across the state. If you go on to the next slide, you'll see similar goal here, but this one here addresses the boosting the residential construction workforce and maybe talking to some of the institutions out there to do more training there, and also streamlining some of the licensing requirements that are out there, and potentially some tax exemptions for affordable housing across the state. The next slide. This goal here has to do with creating some flexibility to respond to housing needs and the market fluctuations. So in this one here, reducing the regulatory barriers for the housing development, and also researching some examples that may exist across the nation on what other states may be doing. This next slide is with the similar goal here and the creating flexibility, but this is to streamline the inspection process. We found that it's very varied across the state and the different time frames that it takes. Second bullet on here, you'll see that seek funding resources for down payment assistance. That's something that we're doing directly there at MFA. The next slide, similar goal on the flexibility, but this one is to explore innovative home ownership programs, which include extending maybe the amortization of loans, or maybe accelerating it in some cases to gain more equity up front. Then exploring programs that are aimed at maintaining home ownership that could include, say, maybe some housing counseling or financial counseling for those that may need it. The next slide has to do with manufactured housing. As Rebecca mentioned, the price of housing has really skyrocketed, and this could be a vehicle, especially in the rural areas, for some home ownership opportunities. Some challenges there is that we are also very varied across the state on the various counties and how they convert chattel loans over to real property. So maybe streamlining that process would be one of the things we'd look at. And MFA has actually developed a pilot program on purchasing manufactured homes and financing those. Next slide has to do with maybe using underutilized properties and redeveloping those. So the bullet you see here is providing funding to improve the condition of existing homes. Next slide has to do with preserving existing affordable housing, so supporting the preservation of units across the state, and then also monitoring the qualified allocation plan, which we put out to make sure that it is evenly balanced between preservation and new construction. Next goal has to do with building assurance among property owners. This would be to maybe enhance the loss mitigation that landlords are seeing out there. We have a program that's currently being piloted with CYFD, where there's an insurance program, if you will, that they can come and make a claim to MFA if the security deposits that the landlord has does not cover all the damages. And so that gives them more comfort in being able to rent their units, if you will, to maybe folks that they normally wouldn't. Next slide, similar goal, but talks about creating a permanent housing stability fund to serve renters who need help in paying the rent. The next slide goes into expanding successful housing services, some pre-development grants to maybe help develop that capacity with folks that are wanting to provide permanent supportive housing, and then increase collaboration between service providers and property managers. The next slide on the similar goal is expanding funding for the linkages program. This is a program which has been very successful. We currently have a little over 300 vouchers funded through the state for folks that have severe mental illnesses, and it's worked real well, and we're working with Health and Human Services to try to get more funding in that area. And then also addressing the operating subsidy that it takes to operate those permanent supportive housing units. Next slide on the similar goal is evaluating the coordinated entry system, which is a system used for homeless providers on how they assess somebody coming in for assistance, to make sure that those that are in most need are the ones that are getting assisted. Next slide. This goal has to do with strengthening supportive services and examining how Medicaid could potentially be used to pay for some of those services. Next slide talks a little bit about the goal on strengthening support for emergency homelessness interventions and advocating for increased state and local appropriations, including funding to improve these shelters that are currently exist out there. And we fund about 25 to 30 of those around the state, depending on the year. At this point, I know we covered this pretty quickly. We're trying to stay within our time frame, but we are definitely willing to take any questions that you may have at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. Councilors, any questions for the MFA? Councilor Bassan.
Mr. President, I appreciate all of the goals. There's a lot of them, and I think that they're really spot on. I especially recognize the need for stability and for new buildings. With the strategic plan that you have and all of these goals that you want to meet, what's your plan to reevaluate how you're doing with that and continuing to make sure that you're achieving these goals or reevaluating the progress that you're obtaining?
Council President and Council Bazan, thank you for the question. What we plan on doing, and I mentioned earlier that we have an advisory committee composed of 20 individuals from across the state. I think we actually have one of them present here today, and Lisa Huval. I think I saw her a little earlier from the city. We also have somebody from DFA, from Health and Human Services, some nonprofits, local governments, and some other funding agencies as well, tribal governments. So we will be meeting on a regular basis to evaluate all of the goals and strategies and the action plans that we have and adjust as needed. Invariably, there'll be changes in the environment. One of the big wins that we had this last year, which would have been maybe at the top of our list here, is getting some additional resources for all of these strategies here. But as you may be aware, Senator Nancy Rodriguez helped us pass a bill last year or earlier this year, Senate Bill 134, which will provide reoccurring funds to the New Mexico Housing Trust Fund. It is estimated that that'll be between 25 and 30 million this coming year. So that'll help us meet a lot of these goals. Definitely won't be enough to meet all of the goals that are on here, but we will evaluate on a regular basis and adjust as needed. And we do a similar thing with our strategic plan with our board, and they keep us on task every quarter. We report to them on how we're making progress. And I hope that addresses your question.
It does, and then just to add to that, I think that with the lofty goals that you have, I just hope that the strategic plan doesn't get adjusted too much so that the goals keep changing and moving, because I would be very curious as you start achieving some of them, even the small little ticks that you can knock off. I would be happy to hear about those because I think that the way that this is laid out is the way that strategic plan should be and setting goals, and I would love to see some progress and hear about it in the future.
Thank you.
Councilor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all so much for coming down to give us an update on this. I think a lot of folks don't know as much about MFA as perhaps we all should, because it has its fingers in so many important issues in our community. It's an important state agency, but this is a city council meeting. And so my question is, what can we do at the city to partner more with MFA? What relationships do we have now, and how can we bolster some of those as we try to align our goals with yours? I mean, we share the same populations. Any and most of all of those goals are shared amongst us, but we're doing some disparate work. How can we cooperate better?
Council President and Councilor Davis, thank you for the question there. I will tell you that we work closely with the city's housing, that be Linda Bridge as the Albuquerque housing, and also Lisa Huval here and Carol Pierce. So we coordinate on this on a regular basis. As far as how the city can continue to support this, I would think with this housing strategy, anything that you can do to help us get the word out there and get some support for these goals and strategies would be great. And then just the continued support of the department at the city. We do tend to partner together, and some of those developments or communities that I mentioned a little bit earlier, they're leveraged resources with MFA funds and some city funds as well. So we want to thank you for your continued support and just doing more of that.
Councilor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. President. You mentioned well, one of the solutions is reducing the regulatory burden. Can you give some examples of that? Specifically in the city of Albuquerque, are there some regulatory laws in place that you specifically see as a burden to new housing, new multi-housing?
Councilor Bitten and Council President and Councilor Lewis, you know, one of the things that some of the examples that came up would be the permitting process. Sometimes the developers, builders come in and they have a hard time. There's not a specific time frame on where they will get their developments approved, and you know, time is money in their world. So that would be one of the areas there. Sometimes when they come out and do inspections, if they can't judge when those inspections are going to be done, or there's not timeliness in that, that also costs them money. So those would be two examples that I could give at this point.
Well, and thank you. I think you know, any goals that are actually, you know, actionable are going to have to be, you know, specific like that. So thanks for sharing some of those specific examples, and I'd love to help tackle some of those with you. And if you could help us with fleshing some of those out as well. You mentioned some members of your advisory board. Are there some builders that are part of that advisory board? Some private builders that are advising you in that way?
Council President and Councilor Lewis, that is correct. We do have from the Home Builders Association, we have Jack Millard that's on the board. And in addition to those 20 members, we've also had some focus groups, and some of them specific to home builders out there across the state. So we do have input from them.
And of everything on your list as far as goals, are there would you say top two that are going to make the biggest difference right now?
That is Council President and Councilor Lewis. That is a tough one. With MFA and covering the full spectrum of housing from homelessness to home ownership, it's hard for me to pick any favorites. I would say that they are all very important. I think if I had one goal, would be maybe to really communicate this strategy and the various goals to as many of the key leaders across the state to help us support in putting these together. That would be maybe the main thing in getting the word out and gaining support for the strategy itself that has a lot of support from the full spectrum of housing providers out there.
Well, thank you, and I think any direction you can give us as far as just priority as well too. I think when you got a long list, I mean, if everybody's busy doing everything, then nobody's doing anything. I think, and that's the danger, I think, of that. But if there are some ways that you can help us flesh some of those out, and I think maybe I zeroed in a little bit on the regulatory burden. I mean, those are things that this council does to be able to, you know, change some laws, some regulatory burdens that could just be something that we could change right now with some simple legislation and a process to be able to do that. I mean, I think we're looking for some ways that we can really help and put some things to action right now. I appreciate it. Thanks for your work.
Councilor Feeblecorn.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Hernandez, for being here tonight. I wanted to just ask a few questions around something else that you guys do really, really well, and I think it fits in with this conversation that we're having. We have a lot of folks in New Mexico, and particularly in Albuquerque, who are precariously housed because of really high energy burdens. And you are the responsible party for the weatherization program for the state of New Mexico. I was just wondering if you could give a few words about how the influx of money from the IIJA and the IRA are going to really help bolster that program and really keep more people in their homes that are already in homes right now, keep them housed.
Council President and Councilor Feeblecorn, thank you for the question. And yes, we do operate the weatherization program, the energy efficiency program from New Mexico. And we generally do between 700 and 800 homes a year that get weatherized. And the priority there is to elderly, those that may be handicapped and very low income and have a very high percentage of their funds going towards energy. We have 3 providers across the state. One of them housed here in the Albuquerque area that does the northern part of the state. We're notified about some additional money that's coming our way from DOE. I think about $22 million in a 5-year period, which almost doubles what we've operated with in the past, which includes DOE, New Mexico Gas, PNM, some state funding from time to time, and some El Paso Electric money. So this will really be a boost and help us close to doubling the amount of production that we'll have across the state. And a huge need out there, and really look forward to being able to assist more families.
Thank you. I think it's really important that we keep an eye on both sides. We want to keep people in the homes they're already in, and we also need to provide additional housing as we move forward. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilor Pena.
Mr. President, thank you, Mr. Hernandez, for being here. Just had a question. Thanks. It was a 2-pronged question. One of them was regarding weatherization, so thank you for your question. And then the other one was the affordable housing, multi-housing units. I know that in the past, MFA has received dollars to potentially fund like 5 through across the state, so it becomes very competitive. Can you tell me, have you increased the amount of those projects, or has it remained kind of the same? Because I know that tends to be a big issue because it's so complex, because it requires the MFA, state funding, federal tax credits, local funding, and private investment.
Council President and Councilor Pena, thank you for the question. The program that I believe you're referring to is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. It is, I would say, the most competitive program we have at MFA, and we generally fund 2 to 3, or we get 2 to 3 times more applications than we're able to fund. We fund between 4 to 7 a year, just depending on the size of those developments or those communities. I don't see that changing. That's a federal program where funding comes to us on a formula basis. There is some movements at the federal level to increase the amounts by 50% over a time period. But if we're successful there, we'll be able to do more. If we're not successful in that area there, some of the things that we're going to be able to do here in 2024, I mentioned earlier that Senator Rodriguez was able to get the Senate Bill 134 passed, which gives us a lot more money on the New Mexico Housing Trust Fund. So it'll help us do more of those developments with some additional gap funding or financing from MFA. That's the 9% tax credits that you're referring to. There's also a 4% that doesn't provide quite as much equity, but that program is being used more and more, and actually here in the Albuquerque area as well. Requires more gap financing, but that's money that could become available from MFA in the near future.
So, Mr. President, so your goal is to try to increase that and identify additional resources, because it seems as though that's one of the ways that you can actually secure the most housing, right, in those 2 programs? They can be built in one single time?
Council President and Councilor Pena, that is correct. That has been one of the most successful programs around the nation, actually, and where the affordable housing, I forget the percentage, but it's probably 80% of all affordable housing has low-income housing tax credits in it. So we're hopeful that we're successful in increasing those amounts, but definitely not in control at the federal level, but we'll continue to advocate for that. And in the meantime, try to maybe push the 4% tax credit some more with additional gap finding or financing from MFA.
So, Mr. President, just one last thing is just because I know that when we've funded projects and, you know, we had less than, I think, 10 million, but we couldn't use the 10 million for those types of projects because there just wasn't enough money to put a package together, if you will, for a lack of a better term. And now we've increased the funding for that. So then it stays kind of in this pot, unutilized for affordable housing. So what would be your strategy to kind of try to, I mean, I know you already said that you're trying to seek additional resources, but as a city, I think it makes it difficult for us to like kind of continue to put money into the affordable housing when we can't utilize those dollars because of those barriers.
Councilor President and Councilor Peña, I would definitely, what I would do is maybe I'm going to get and maybe set up a meeting and have more conversations with Carol and Lisa over here to determine what funding sources you have and some of the barriers that may be there, so we can collaborate a little bit more to make sure that that money's put to good use. Because I can tell you, and you can see from the data that Rebecca shared with you, there's a great need out there, and there's a lot more need for funding. So we don't want to leave any funding on the table if we can work through some of the challenges or constraints that you may be seeing.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Hernandez, just to follow up on that question, and you had mentioned the gap financing and 4% tax credit. I think the city has historically done 9% projects more often than not, and I think that's kind of some of the disconnect, even though we have robust funding now within the affordable housing budget line item. But those 4% tax credits, with another thing that we did, which was creating a $20 million recurring voucher availability, that's part of that gap financing, is it not, for the 4% projects?
Council President, the $20 million, are you referring to the New Mexico Housing Trust Fund additional funding that may be coming?
We put 20 million additional recurring. I believe I've got that right. Excuse me, I've got it reversed. So we've got 10 million in recurring vouchers just as a result of recent actions by the council annually, at least until somebody does something different. We've got 10 million annually in recurring voucher funding. And then, or other, it could also be used for other operating expenses and other types of gap financing. And then what Councilor Peña is referring to is we have made a robust change within the, or addition to the pot of the Workforce Housing Trust Fund, which is usually the soft local money that's used for LIHTC projects.
Council President, yeah, I'm not too familiar with that. I'm sure Lisa and Carol also are, so I'll get with them. I can tell you that with those 4% tax front, and definitely if they can be used for vouchers as well, I think that'll be helpful, but we'll need to kind of determine what constraints you may have on that funding source and how they may be used.
Yeah, that there's a narrative out there about that may or not be completely accurate, but we know we need to build up our capacity within the department, within the city to expend those funds. Thanks so much for coming down and speaking to us, telling us what MFA is up to, and very much appreciate your partnership with the city.
Thank you, Council President, and we look forward to making some progress on this and maybe reporting back to you in the future. Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right, next we have a presentation from CNM, and our CNM president, Tracy Hartzler, will make the presentation. Welcome.
Good evening, President, Council President, and members of the council. I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. It's nice to see some of you in person. I think I've only met some of you by Zoom or WebEx or whatever medium we were using for the last 2.5 years, so this is a treat. I just want to take a few minutes, and I know my colleague here will pull up a presentation, but I just wanted to take a few minutes, one, to thank you for your support and your strong partnership with CNM over the years. We're excited that we're certainly in the city. We certainly appreciate your support, not only recently for our food pantry that serves our students directly, but certainly all the other agreements that we have to help our students get the transportation they need, a number of the wraparound supports that they need to help be successful students, and certainly the support that you provide to our employers who help use our programs, both in our workforce development programs. So tonight what I'm here to mention is the statewide general obligation bond election that's coming up here in November. There are a number of projects affecting about 22 colleges and universities. Almost $300 million worth of projects are on that statewide bond, Bond 3. And again, I think the presentation will come up. But Bond 3 represents all of the higher education projects, including some projects for our local libraries and senior centers. Importantly for the statewide bond election, and the next slide please, you'll note that this obligation and what all of our institutions are going out to the state to request support for does not change the tax rate. So that's what's really important for most people, is that their tax rates will not change. And we will also support a significant number of institutions and local communities, not only here in central New Mexico, but throughout the state. You'll see that this will create about 2,000 jobs across the state. It will bring specifically to central New Mexico $94 million, both with the project that I'll describe here for C&M and also for 3 projects that are for the University of New Mexico and University of New Mexico Health Sciences Center. Next slide, please. So what's most important for this project is that it supports probably the first step among quite a few here that will support the needs of our local communities, in particular our skilled trades facilities. So we anticipate over the next 10 years we will have at least 3 major investments in the skilled trades, mostly replacing our oldest facilities here at the campus. This project that's on Bond 3 will replace 3 of our oldest buildings that were constructed in the late 1960s and 1972. In those 3 buildings, we have a number of our key traditional trades programs. What we will do is build a new trades facility on our main campus downtown that will cost about $56 million. I think it started at 42 back in 18 months ago. So I mean anyway, it's quite stressful, as you all know, when you're building in construction at this time. You know that the challenges with supply chain inflation has really affected our projects. I'm incredibly proud that the state is considering additional support. Certainly our local voters have already provided at least $20 million for this project. What we are seeking on the statewide bond is $15 million. Again, so that's still a substantial support from the state to to a facility that will include most of our programs that I'll highlight on the next page. Also, 2 other important notes as part of our facilities plan for the next couple of years. We have entered an agreement with Rio Rancho Public Schools where we will build and take some of the programs that are currently here on our downtown campus, and we'll move those to, again, still serve central New Mexico, but move those into Sandoval County. And those are our auto mechanic, diesel mechanic, and electric vehicle programs that will start. So again, how do we better use our resources to leverage partnerships with other entities and, frankly, leverage our dollars so that we can really create a center that, again, is led and in both ideas and development by our employers who are saying they have this workforce demand, by economic trends where we see electric vehicles, not surprising, resulting in greater demand for our students and our services. And also certainly growth in our diesel mechanic program. So again, looking to leverage those resources. We also are certainly strongly engaged in conversations with the city and the state on a film center of excellence. So expanding our 20-year film program that has strong results, but really expanding that partnership with the state and the governor's proposal to have a New Mexico Media Academy. And so we're looking for a site to build that. So again, local voters have supported those footprints for us, but we know in the next 10 years that's where we're headed to, again, really meet the needs of our growing economy, provide learners with really inspiring places to learn and learn their trades. By the way, learn their trades over time, because we will train them once. We certainly anticipate that we have our students and our learners and our employers come back to us repeatedly to really take advantage of our new facilities and help continuing educate and help our learners on their journey and their continuing education efforts. So this program, as I believe you can see, replaces a number of will be the home for our new skilled trades program. So again, traditional plumbing, HVAC, we have a new mechatronics lab or program. And what does that really mean? That means that most of our skilled trades, as we've heard from our employers, our union reps, certainly our school partners, state agencies and local governments, all of us know that technology, electronics, and engineering have all come together to shape how we work and live, whether it's the smart thermostat, on your wall or it's your car. We all know there's a basic literacy that's needed in any skilled trade that you're entering. So our mechatronics program helps bring those learners into their skilled trade area where they're going to learn that basic information technology, again, electronics and engineering, to help them navigate all the technology changes that are going on in our traditional skilled trades. So that's a highlight of our program. The last slide I have is just to remind you all, if you didn't know, early voting is in the middle of October. Again, Election Day is November 5th. We certainly encourage you and members of the public to consider Bond 3 and certainly to continue your support, to seek your support for C&M as you've supported us in the past. With that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions for the president, councilors? Thanks so much for coming down and speaking.
Thank you. I appreciate your
Appreciate it.
time. Thank you so much.
All right, we have no economic development discussion tonight. We'll move to general public comments. Members of the public can provide live public comment to the council in person or virtually if they've signed up per the instructions published on our agenda. Here are the public comment ground rules. Each participant has up to 2 minutes to present. Comments are to be addressed to the councilors only through the council president. Any disruptive conduct will result in removal from the meeting. And the light on the podium will be green for the first minute and a half. Then the light will turn yellow, indicating you have 30 seconds to wrap up your comments. At 2 minutes, the light will turn red, and a bell will ring indicating your time is up. Mr. Cornelius, please call the name of the first speaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Our first speaker this evening is Bex Hampton, followed by Ben Imbus.
Hello, good evening. My name is Bex. I'm a tenant in District 1. I know that council, you all care about us Albuquerque residents, and 40% of us are actually tenants. That's almost half the city. And right now, rent has skyrocketed an unprecedented amount, harming people from all walks of life. And not just tenants alone, but small businesses that pay rent are also affected. And with rising rents, small business owners who rent a space or work from home face the risk of losing so much income that they could end up shutting down their business or losing their livelihood and risk being forced into poverty or homelessness. Ending the prohibition on rent control, I think, really fits well into the MFA's strategic plan to provide affordable housing. I'm here to encourage you all to vote yes next city council meeting on the memorial, to stand with us as we urge the state legislator to end the prohibition on rent control. This undemocratic prohibition is infringing on local communities' freedom to make decisions about their own housing needs. We need the democratic right to make these types of decisions as a community. Thank you, and see you next meeting.
Ben Imbus, followed by Patty Garrett. Patty Garrett, followed by Annalie Desenier.
Hi, so I'm a property owner in District 2, and since August 2nd, my next door neighbor has been terrorizing literally our neighborhood. He apparently is diagnosed schizophrenic and has been off of his medication. And in these last 2 months, there are 3 of us who in this townhome share a foundation with him. He's destructed property, torn up a free little library, vandalized cars, destroyed trees, vandalized a trash can. In addition, he's been flooding his backyard with a garden hose for 8+ weeks, which is eroding the retaining wall behind our homes. Water Authority says they're monitoring it, but the owner pays the fines. There isn't much they can do. They even told one neighbor that that he was dangerous and that they weren't going to send people out anymore. A police officer told us to call code enforcement, but when they were called, they said to call the police or the mosquito police. Every call that we've made we've had threats. He was actually arrested in a SWAT standoff in my neighborhood for chasing a teenager with a metal rebar and telling him he was going to kill him. He was declared incompetent and the charges were dropped. He's told us he was going to burn the effing place down, and then when we smelled smoke and called 911, no one came. He's screamed at my 18-year-old daughter, I'm going to rape and kill all the women here. We called 911. We've called 311. We've called 242 cops. We've asked for the crisis intervention to be sent. He's said the other day, I know how this ends. It ends with me killing you, mother effers. When I also teach, I'm a public school teacher and teach right in the neighborhood. And when I was walking home from work the other day, he told me he was going to punch me in my effing face. He rings doorbells,
Garrett,
he jiggles
Ms. Garrett,
doorknobs.
your time is up, but we would direct you to the police officers in the back and speak directly.
Okay,
with
the
them.
issue though is that police are not responding.
I understand. Your time is up. Thank you.
Mr. President, I have a question for the police administration in reference to this, and I'd like to address it.
Mr. President and Councilor Sanchez, I would be happy to visit with this individual and get information and get APD to look into what's happening with the situation and report back to you.
Okay, well, the question that I have, Mr. Rael, is I have the same exact issue going on with a homeowner in my district where we're not getting any kind of response from the police department. The police department have been called numerous times. We've had this same individual in my district make threats. I've reached out to the police administration numerous times, and these individuals who are causing the threats in the neighborhood, they need to really be addressed. So I want to make sure that not only this incident is taken care of and addressed, but also the one in my neighborhood as well. And I just wanted to ask them questions as to what they're doing right now to help this neighbor here.
Mr. President and Councilor Sanchez, be happy to get the information from your constituent as well, and I will make sure that APD administration contacts you and has a conversation with you about both of these situations and what they're doing on these issues.
Okay, thank you. Ma'am, we're going to do everything we can to try to address this situation.
I've emailed all of the news stations, and so I'm doing everything I can because it's not going to end well. And it's a crisis. So I would hope you would all want to know.
I agree. We need to make sure that no one is hurt in your neighborhood, as well as the neighborhood in my area as well. Thank you.
Next speaker.
There's no applause allowed in the chambers, please.
Our next speaker is Annalie Desanier, followed by Cynthia Rodriguez.
Hello. My name is Anna Lee, and I am an organizer with the People's Housing Project, as well as a resident of District 2. In the spirit of the proclamation for Domestic Awareness Month, and as a survivor of domestic violence myself, I would just like to mention that the lack of affordable housing can trap a person in a dangerous situation. When rents are unaffordable, many are forced to stay in an abusive relationship so that they don't become homeless. While we have a number of demands that we've come, that you all know a few of those. And those demands, we believe, would drastically increase Albuquerque's residents' access to safe, clean, affordable housing. Right now, we're feeling very encouraged by the memorial set forth by Councilor Feeblecorn that will urge the state to repeal the prohibition on rent control. We've had a chance to look at the memorial urging the New Mexico State Legislature to repeal the New Mexico. Is this cutting out on me? Okay, it sounds funny to me. Okay, we've had a chance to look at the memorial urging the New Mexico State Legislature to repeal the New Mexico rent control prohibition, and we feel like it's written really well, and we feel like once, if you all have had a chance to look at it, you will feel the same. As it stands right now, the prohibition on rent control is preventing the democratic process Local governing bodies need to have the freedom to make their own decisions about housing that suits their needs. And you know, we've come here and expressed our needs and our frustrations, and we're very thankful that this council has decided to take action in the form of the memorial. And please vote yes and stand with us. Thank you.
Cynthia Rodriguez, followed by Zoe Johnson.
Thank you. My name is Cynthia Rodriguez. I'm an organizer with the People's Housing Project, and I also live in District 9, which is represented by Ms. Grout. Today, I'm here to ask that at the next City Council meeting, that Ms. Grout and all other councilors here vote yes to the memorial urging the state to end the prohibition on rent control. Right now, rents are skyrocketing, and they're forcing renters into disparity. Workers and small business owners alike are having to choose what costs they must cut to afford a roof over their head. Passing this memorial would show that the council stands with the residents of Albuquerque and cares about taking action to address the housing crisis. We know that you all see the crisis our beloved city is facing and that you want to do everything possible to solve it. Please vote yes to the memorial urging the state legislature to repeal the prohibition on rent control. So that we can make rent affordable for all Albuquerque residents. And we also invite everybody here and all the residents in Albuquerque to join us at the next City Council meeting on October 17th, where you guys will be voting for this memorial, hopefully for it. So thank you all so much.
Zoe Johnson, followed by Joe Garcia. Joe Garcia, followed by Francesco Artist. Did you say Joe Garcia, sir? Yeah, yes, sir. We did.
Council members and mayor, my name is Joe Garcia. I'm a Vietnam veteran, did 2 tours in Vietnam, but the thing is, I have a plan, or we have a plan, our church does, that we need $1,500 to support the building. And it's a psychological warfare we're having with the homeless. We keep calling them homeless people, but they need psychological help. And the information that we can get, we can congregate them in some area, like our church, preach them the idea of motivation and exactly where their goals are, not when their goals being now, the goals when they were young and they're vibrant, they were educated. You know, who knows what happened in between, but this is like a virus. We have to fight it in a psychological way. And we're doing a good job. We're trying to figure out, but we don't have PhDs. We have all located at the University of New Mexico to see if some of their class students would come and just fall in place with the homeless that gather there and look at their actions. Analyze their degrees of psychological reflections of what they see, do. Maybe somehow or another we can find out what the element of that disease is doing to our, I call them Albuquerqueans, not homeless people. There's a psychological warfare happening and we need to fix it. So if we can have your permission to, or application for a funding of support for 3 months, and if it comes out where you could brainstorm the ideas that come out of here, maybe we can do something about the homeless. Thank you.
Francesco Artist, followed by Tad Nemiski.
Council President, City Councilors, I want to give a shout out to the redistricting committee. They did amazing work. I misplaced my notes. I don't remember the name. I think it's Petra Morris. She's amazing. Not only super professional, very knowledgeable, but she did it all with good humor and grace. Amazing. And as an artist, I try to keep myself sharp by trying to do something I normally don't do. So I was inspired by the fact that this only happens once every 10 years. So I created a map, and apologies to District 1 because I started with District 1. If you flip it to the back, I want to put you all on notice that I started numerically, but for better or worse, the plan is to do one for each district. And I feel this is a great way for maybe a fresh start, you know, moving forward, you know, one for all for one. So thank you all.
Councilor Bassan.
Mr. President, thank you. I think this is really cool, but I want everyone to know that Councilor Sanchez just said, "Is that me?"
I recognized myself, believe me. I just had to ask. Thank you.
Tad Nimiski, followed by Alan Lisek.
My name is Ted Niemiecki. And, well, let me begin. If citizens destroy city property, end up in jail, right? Yeah, absolutely. Or in penitentiary. Here is City of Albuquerque under management, Mayor Keller, City Council, and Park Management destroy Coronado Park, comparing to beautiful, as used to be, as Roosevelt Park was. Well, that is crime against citizens of Albuquerque. It is crime. Also, takes our tax money. Well, no, they're not stupid. They are smart. They know how to get loaded own pocket. Now, speaking about taxes, going back to taxes, at the national level, prices, gas, more than double up. This administration, compared to $1.80 to Trump. Well, Biden blaming oil company blaming, I'm sorry, they all playing same game. Tax money and they have to have profit, oil company. As higher tax prices, also percentage is income for the, speaking about taxes. Well, people worry about Social Security. Don't worry about it. What we paying? The government found that way to collect. Same way what's going on right now with grocery and gas. Thank you.
Alan Lisek, followed by Anthony Erdogan.
All right. Mr. President and Council, thank you very much. My name is Alan Lisek, and I'm the Executive Director of the Apartment Association. My comments are directed at the memorial regarding lifting the prohibition on rent control. I wanted to provide some facts about rent control. Rent control negatively impacts the housing market by discouraging the construction of new housing, expediting the deterioration and loss of existing housing, and diminishing the value and investment in properties. Rent control does not only adversely impact many different industries, its effects also place burdens on state and local governments. The reduction in property values that result from rent control lead to a decline in property tax revenue. As we know, property taxes pay for schools, public safety, and so on. According to a poll of economists by the American Economic Review, 93% agree that a ceiling on rents reduces the quantity and quality of housing available. Just this last year in St. Paul, Minnesota, they passed rent control. 3 months into it, multifamily building permits were down 80% year over year, and that includes affordable housing. Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, across the river with no rent control, overall construction was up. Turning off the supply to new housing would be disastrous for us as a community. As we just heard from the MFA, we need housing. The solution to higher cost of housing is not price controls. The answer is to increase the supply of housing. It's the law of supply and demand. Streamline the permitting process, make it easier to build, and encourage investment in New Mexico. Thank you.
Anthony Erdogan, followed by Christopher Hurley.
Council President, distinguished members of my city council, I come to you with a heavy heart. I say this with the highest respect and intent. And at this present time, as a disabled veteran at 100% disability, I want to thank Clarissa Pena and what she has done for my cruising culture that I belong to since 1975. And what she's done on the west side with the grand opening of the Route 66 Event Center is totally awesome. I want to thank her morally from my heart and from my ancestry that my family's been here since 1542. Thank you, ma'am, for what you're doing for the city of Albuquerque. I appreciate you very much. And most of all, above all, Council President and Mr. Rael, if possible, sir, if I could make appointment through your offices, and unfortunately I have to do it in public comment because the matter at hand at this present time become life-threatening for myself and my family. So if possible, with Mr. Rael as well as you, Chamber President, or should I say Council President, I'd highly appreciate it if we could get together and talk about the problem at hand at this present time. And once again, Councilor Pena, thank you very much for what you have done for the city of Albuquerque. I appreciate you, ma'am. Thank you.
Christopher Hurley, followed by Steve Grant.
Hello. So I'm Christopher Hurley, Head of Research at Excalibur Research and Development and part-time rideshare driver. We're having several issues with rideshare within the city. Currently issuing with the rideshare drivers a boycott on Central Avenue and the Balloon Fiesta. Our current issues are that with Balloon Fiesta, we are losing money picking up because of the huge diversion where we used to have a route for taxi and rideshare to come in. Central, we have some of our female drivers getting sexually assaulted because we're forced to go down the alleyways behind Central instead of having a rideshare, like say using the Art Line, where there's street lights and people to see what's going on. Not to mention trying to tell a someone drunk, know your other left gets annoying after a while. We're having issues at the Sunport as well. TNC zone that we're supposed to pick up at, which is covered under city ordinance that no one is allowed to park in the taxi TNC or RTNC, is not being enforced by the police or by airport security. This leads to currently a 40% increase in pickup time and usually wastes on average for each driver about $500 worth of rides a day. Other than that, outside of rideshare, I would, ask a question on the referendum on the rent. There's currently such a disparity that you can earn enough to not qualify for low-income housing, but not earn enough to qualify for regular housing. And I currently house one person every 3 months trying to get them help with this at my house. And I would like to know if the rent companies would like to pay me rent for that.
Thank you. Steve Grant, followed by Danger Varos.
Hello, Council President and fellow councilors. My name is Steve Grant. I'm a small multifamily owner here in Albuquerque. Have been so for many years. Hold a monthly rental property meetup for investors, and I'm also the president of the Apartment Association, and also one of the members of the Housing Council for Mr. Hernandez that just spoke. I come to you tonight in response to those that wish to repeal the housing rental law, control law. I represent thousands of small independent operators throughout the city in New Mexico. And believe me when I say we all want the best for both the property owner and the tenant. Yes, we all realize that homelessness in our streets is a huge problem, big time. Number one, can we attribute the monthly rent as the number one reason why we have this homelessness problem? And number two, is it taking such severe action such as repealing the rent control law really the answer? There are solutions that we can work towards a betterment of this for future housing, I believe, in my opinion. Many smaller property owners have huge concerns surrounding this proposed change, and there will be unintended consequences supported. The National Apartment Association has found substantial evidence that when you make rent control law, the current overall housing development that you see literally will disappear. Additionally, the small local independent owner is really having a hard time keeping up with repairs. For example, a security door that I used to buy at Home Depot for $75 is now $152. The evaporative cooler that used to be $375 is now $575. Lastly, we all know that we're in the middle of this housing shortage. More than ever before, we need to work together and make what is necessary to make it attractive for investors and current property owners to make it happen with what we need to have done in this city. Thank you.
Danger Vados, followed by Good Citizen.
Hello, President and councilors. My name is Danger Vados. You've seen me up here before. I am Albuquerque Alibi's 2019 Best Comic in the City, Thrillist Magazine, best comics to look out for around the country. But I'm not here to tell you any jokes. This is a serious matter. I'm concerned about the country. I'm concerned about our city right now. But there's really, really, really good news. President and Councilor Feeblecorn have introduced this amazing memorial that you can vote on next time you meet that suggests to the state legislature that you repeal the ban on rent control. I'm here as a volunteer, as are my friends, and I appreciate to hear from people who are paid to ask you not to repeal the ban on rent control, but we are volunteers and we're citizens. I'm a dad, I'm a student, I'm a business owner. And I'm really, really excited about this memorial. Thank you for introducing it. I hope that you will all vote for it next time you meet. It's an opportunity to give some democracy into the city. President and Councilor Dan Lewis, you were asking the MFA president about some regulatory measures that can help with the city, and I really think that the prohibition on rent control is this really overburdensome state mechanism that's preventing this body from making democratic decisions for itself, which I think would be best for Albuquerque. It would be best for me and it would be best for my family, and I would really appreciate your vote whenever this comes around. So thank you for your support, and thank you for your time listening to public comment.
Good Citizen, followed by Damon Maddox.
Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to reiterate on maybe what this woman that was being terrorized was saying earlier today, and what the counselor was saying as well about citizens being safe. And I'd like to maybe let all the citizens remind them that the police cannot always be there to protect us. We need to be able to protect ourselves. And that's what the Second Amendment is for. To be able to protect ourselves, because the cops are not always going to be there when we need them. We need to take advantage of that to make ourselves better, to make our communities better. The Second Amendment is there for us to be able to protect ourselves from foreign and domestic enemies, just as well as foreign, domestic too. The people that are in back houses, the people that are willing to threaten us, our neighbors that are gonna hurt us, or the people that aren't in their right minds or have bad intentions. But I just wanted to remind everybody here that that's what the Second Amendment is for, so we can protect ourselves. That's what we need to do. We can't depend on the police to do that. I also want to let them know that I also want to reiterate on our Constitution about it's the supreme law. It's the supreme law, and anything contrary to the Constitution is notwithstanding. So remember our First Amendments, our Second Amendments. All our amendments are important to us, and when the councils are litigating or making ordinances or I mean, not litigating, but legislating, making rules, ordinances, and stuff like that, keep in mind our rights. Those should be protected first before you try to make a law that goes against the people or for the people for their safety. Thank you.
Damon Maddox, followed by Commissioner Debbie O'Malley on Zoom. Commissioner Debbie O'Malley, followed by Nancy Arenas.
Thank you, Mr. President, councilors. I did sign up to speak to EC 22-145. It's a veto message. Is it appropriate to speak now, or do I need to speak then?
You may speak now.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you all for the two proclamations on domestic violence. Population are more vulnerable, especially young women, children, but also women who are experiencing homelessness. The proposed site that's on an all for the one of the first safe outdoor spaces is in my district. I've been working.
Mr. President.
That.
I'm having a hard time understanding what.
Commissioner, yeah, we have a hard time with your
Can you
audio.
hear me now? Can you hear me now? Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. So I just wanted to say that, you know, first of all, as I said, I wanted to thank you both. Thank you all for proclamating violence and that, you know, very vulnerable population. Of course, our men in particular, and the site on Manal, one of the SOSs that did pass or has an application for permitting is in my district. I am supportive of that. I'm working with a group that in fact, I have committed some of my DDF funds, that's district directed funding, for infrastructure for that particular site. This is, again, a very vulnerable population that needs a safe place to stay with support services. I don't believe we can help people if they don't have a safe place to stay. Example, folks who are wanting to drug rehab or other services, we have to be able to find these folks, and ability is very, very important. That you uphold the mayor's veto on the funding. You know, pitting one group against, or you know, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, there's a lot of funding available for veterans, of course, and it's important to support folks homelessness who are veterans. There should be funding available for particularly women, in this case, vulnerable women who need those services as well. So I just wanted to say that I would appreciate that. We need to have operational funding for this particular project for SOSs if we want to make sure that they're secure and safe. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Nancy Arenas, followed by Mia Augustin. You're muted, ma'am.
Try again. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Thank you. Mr. President and councilors, my name is Nancy Arenas. On the City Council website is a letter of introduction for this meeting today, and you will be presented with R2273, directing the Animal Welfare Department to work with the University of New Mexico to collect otherwise disposed of animal tissues in city-owned and sponsored spay-neuter clinics. And I hope that you will all support this, as it will help to reduce and hopefully at some point end the use of animals in a laboratory setting. Thank you.
Mia Augustin, followed by Rhiannon Samuel. I don't see Mia in the waiting room, so Rhiannon Samuel.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the council. My name is Rhiannon Samuel, and I represent NAOP, the Commercial Real Estate Development Association. I am here to speak on the rent control memorial contained within the letter of introduction. As you have already heard from my colleagues, This is not the appropriate or correct answer to the housing challenges that we all face in our city and across the state. To put it plainly, this is a Band-Aid for something that really only has one solution: increasing the supply of all housing. And in fact, you heard from the Mortgage Finance Authority at the top of this meeting that the solution to housing affordability is to build. The development community that I represent wants to do more business in New Mexico, and proposals like these scare away any investment in our city. NAIOP, along with our partner groups, stand ready to work with the council and the administration to reduce the hurdles that are in the way of creating more housing opportunities for everyone. More viable housing solutions include, but are not limited to, less restrictive zoning that prioritizes housing and walkability, quicker turnaround times for development, and residential conversions. Thank you for your time today, and I urge you to consider alternative long-term solutions to our systematic housing issues rather than headline-grabbing propositions like rent control. Thank you.
Up next is Tina Gichela.
Good evening, councilors. Thank you for your time. I'm here just with a quick comment at the moment, asking that the council work with the mayor's office and Family and Community Services and other community partners, schools and community centers and churches to begin to plan for inclement weather that will be coming pretty much right around the corner for warming centers this fall and winter. We've had several incidents over the last few years of really bad cold snaps that come in suddenly, and people that are experiencing homelessness living outside are left wanting for adequate shelter. So I'm just here asking you to begin planning and working with those departments and other community sponsors now so that adequate warm shelter and overnight accommodations can be made available and can be communicated to the public and to people living outside in a timely and effective way. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, that concludes general public comment.
All right, thank you. Thank you to you all for your comments.
Mr. President.
Councilor Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to make a quick comment in reference to what has gone on today in reference to the affordable housing and the rent control. As we were listening to everything today, I take notes, and I've taken notes every single day. And today I took notes from Mrs. Max. I took notes from Annalee, from Mrs. Cindy, Mr. Allen, Mr. Grant, Mr. Dangervaros, and I've taken notes from you every single time I've been here. And when you get right down to it, I appreciate everything that you're doing, and I understand kind of in a nutshell what we need to do as a city council. And I would like to sit down and have major discussions about this, but where I'm at right now is the city of Albuquerque, the state, we're flush with cash right now. And I would say let's wave the flag. We need to actually get more housing out there. I think it's important that we open the floodgate gate, deal with the MFA, release the regulatory burdens, get these projects moving forward. I think it's really, really important. I think that if we get these projects moving forward, we're going to have a win-win for all. Because if we move these projects forward, then we're going to have affordable housing. And I think it'd be nice to have affordable housing. And let's have families live in a nice, thought-out community where they have the best of the best, where it's safe, maybe parks, swimming pools, community centers. So I think we need to increase the building as quick as we possibly can so that we can get to where we need to be. To me, that sounds like a very, very natural progression in reference to stabilizing the markets so that the folks that don't have enough money to compete, if we make more housing, then you'll be able to compete. It'll cause the other folks who are who are charging the higher rent to be stabilized so they won't be able to raise their rent. And then maybe those folks can be able to add and make renovations to their house. So I think when I heard the other counselors talk about it, I think it really makes sense that we immediately do something as a council to get rid of those regulatory burdens so that we can start building enough affordable housing so that we can get to where we need to be. And like I said, that sounds like a win-win for everyone and sounds like a natural progression to move forward. So that was my comment, and I totally appreciate everything that you guys are doing, and I totally understand what we need to do to actually help the situation. So thank you so much for everyone's cooperation in reference to that.
All right, we're now on administration question and answer period. Councilors, any questions for the administration? Councilor Grout.
Mr. President, thank you. I have a quick question for APD. Hi there, good evening. It's been brought to my attention that sometimes when people have, they have issues with crime or theft or anything of, all of these things where they need police support, sometimes they're instructed to write an incident report, and sometimes they're instructed to write a police report. I'd like to know the difference between the two, and how are they, how do you gather that information and record it?
Mr. President and Councilor Grout, Deputy Chief Barker with Albuquerque Police Department. There's not a difference between an incident and a police report. However, there is a difference between an incident and an offense report. Both of those reports are considered police reports. What that means is that they're entered into the same computer system in the same manner. The difference on these reports is what's being written about. So when an officer is writing a report, if they select a crime, it is considered an offense report. If the reporting officer selects a category that is not a crime, it's an incident report. Some of the categories for incident reports includes an apparent natural death, a suicide, found property, and informational reports or behavioral health reports. Since these reports are not crimes, they do not fall within a crime category. However, we still have the availability and the access to withdraw data from that, meaning that if we wanted to look at how many suicides had been committed during the year, we would be able to pull that data. What's also important to note is that after an officer writes a report, it is approved and reviewed by a supervisor. After that, the process is that report review will review that report and make sure that it is categorized correctly. So if it's written as an incident report, but a crime was committed, it would be sent back to the officer to be rewritten.
Very good. Thank you. Thanks for clarification. That's it. Thank you.
Councilor Bassan.
Mr. President, I have a question for transit, please. Good evening. I can't wait to meet you. I heard about you today. So my question is, that, we've been getting some emails, and I wanted to make sure to follow up regarding bus routes. There's a few of them, probably more than I know about, that are not running as consistently as advertised. So people are counting on being able to get a ride from these buses, and they're waiting, and either they show up extremely late or they don't show up at all. And I'm wondering, I can imagine it's probably to do with staffing. So that aside, what are we doing about it? And is there a way to change the advertising on it so that people don't they don't continue to count on this as a method of transportation in their day?
Council President, Councilor Bassan, I'm Leslie Keener. I'm the new Director of Transit for ABQ Ride. So yes, this does have a lot to do with our driver shortages that we're currently being faced with. And it's not just here in Albuquerque, it's a nationwide shortage that we are dealing with as well. So we do have several vacancies that are out there for both our motor coach operators and our Sunvan chauffeurs. So this is causing us some issues, obviously, with staffing some of the runs. Unfortunately, you know, there's lots of mornings or even mid-shift that we don't know whether we're going to have a driver available or not. A lot of this has to do with unplanned layoffs that we can't plan for, and we just don't have the extra personnel around to provide protector service like we used to have, where we would have someone sitting there to be able to put on a run. So unfortunately, a lot of that is unplanned, where we don't know in advance that we're not going to be able to fill a run and make that trip. What we are doing right now is trying to increase our communication with the citizens and the public when we are not going to be able to fill a run. We don't have that real-time information available right now to our citizens. So like you said, I can understand the frustration and inconvenience that is felt when you have a planned trip and you're waiting for the bus and it doesn't show up. What we are working on right now is a patch with our transit app that will provide that real-time communication. However, in the meantime, right now we are asking for citizens to either call 311 or 243-RIDE. They can give you that updated information real-time at that point. But this patch is basically a feed from our operational system that will then go into the transit app and provide that real-time information. On top of that, you know, we are actively hiring, trying to recruit as actively as we can, doing a lot of unorthodox types of events. I know we did have the car show earlier this year. We are working with the union to try and have some job fairs and just really, you know, trying to entice as many drivers as we can to fill those vacancies.
Thank you, Director. I think that, I mean, all of that is very reasonable, and I understand where we're coming from with that. So I guess in addition to what you're doing, Mr. Rael, if you could, I don't know, let me know how to help. Let me know how we can get DTI involved. How do we make sure that while we're telling Albuquerque to ride city buses with 0 fares and seemingly avoid some catastrophe is more or less what I've been hearing. And also, that's if you happen to get picked up. How do we find a way to allow the riders that are committed to riding and depending on it, make sure that they have consistency and that they too will know when they're going to get home or if they're going to get to work on time? So I'll help where I can. You know, I think that's, but I have 2 emails here that I'm looking at where it's a consistent problem. Literally one constituent here says 25% of, and they ride the same lines, and 1 out of every 4 times they go to ride that line, it's not going to show up. And so they can count on that, which is a huge problem when we're trying to say, let's be more environmentally friendly, let's really advocate for all of this, and yet we can't be dependable either. And I'm not blaming, like, I totally respect the staffing shortages, but we have to quit advertising those routes if we know that they're consistently being a problem, in my opinion.
Mr. President and Councilor Bassan, thanks for the offer to help. And obviously, if you know anyone who wants to be a motor coach operator, please let us know. But more importantly, on a more accurate discussion, we are looking at the entire service for ABQ Ride and looking at this very issue. Unfortunately, as our director just mentioned, we're in a really acute position, as if you will, for hiring drivers. We just cannot hire enough drivers. And so we're looking at all the routes across the city and making some decisions about how do we manage service? Because to your point, if someone's relying on that bus at a certain time and we're having to guess whether or not we're going to be able to deliver a bus at that certain time, it's not fair to the citizen using the service, and quite frankly creates issues for us internally. So we're looking at that to make sure we can review the routes that we cannot make and make some decisions about those particular routes. Additionally, as our director mentioned, we're also looking at using smaller buses where we don't have to have CDL qualifications. That's really the issue across not just Albuquerque or the industry, is the CDL qualifications. So if we're able to use smaller buses, if you will, that don't require a CDL, we might be able to provide better service to some of those routes where normally you would get a 40-foot bus and maybe only have a portion of that bus filled. We might be able to use smaller buses that don't require a CDL and provide the service at the same time. So all of those options are on the table right now. We're reviewing those, and we'll be making some changes and obviously informing all of you of those changes because they affect each one of your districts in some way or another.
Mr. President, thank you, Mr. Rael. I think that, and Director, I'd love to have coffee with you and meet you. But at the same time, so I appreciate all that. I'm on board with it. Let me know again how I can help with it, because the consistency, I think, and the dependability when we're trying to offer this city service is paramount. So I would be remiss if I also didn't make sure to add in there that I've also had many emails come in about the condition of bus stops and the posed danger, shall I say, at some of the bus stops. So there are people avoiding that as well, and I think that we need to make sure, and I know that that's another department as well that we work with to make sure that that's there, but we have to keep people safe while they wait. We have to make sure they can get on the ride that they want to get on. Either that or we just shouldn't be offering it at this point. We might just need to say, sorry, today we can't, this month we can't on this line. Please, that's my, and Mr. President, I do have one more question. So thank you. And Mr. Rael, thank you, Director. Mr. Rael, this one's for you as well. Going off of what public comment we heard earlier regarding rideshare and Balloon Fiesta, who's the one that actually, who makes that map of how to go down west on Paseo, north on 2nd, east on Alameda in order to access Balloon Fiesta Park?
Mr. President and Councilor Bassan, first and foremost, it really is the Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta in terms of how they manage the rideshare program. However, there is involvement with APD and with DMD as it relates to the routes that would be the most effective to get vehicles in and out. This has been a bit of a challenge. I'm just being candid with all of you for some number of fiestas because this rideshare spot has changed. And we've been working with the Balloon Fiesta to find a way to get folks to that event. The challenge, quite frankly, is, as you all know, is just getting cars in and out of the Fiesta is even more of a challenge. And so we're working through that. We're not happy where it is right now in terms of how it's operating. And I'm meeting with our folks in transit, at DMD and police tomorrow to see if we can find a better solution or a better way to get folks in and out of the park. But keep in mind, it's really an interesting dynamic. We have people taking park and ride from Coronado and Cottonwood, waiting in line to get on buses. And then we have folks who are willing to use private transportation to get in faster into the or leave the park. So it's really an interesting dynamic that we have to work through. And now, all in all, we're not happy about how that's working out. So we'll be looking to see if we can't modify the route or create a better way to get in and out of the park.
Mr. Rael, is it the overall pattern? Is that APD or Balloon Fiesta that makes that overall for all of us? I mean, even when I go, it's Paseo to 2nd to Alameda. I'm not just talking about rideshare, is it? Because I've heard, this is one of those I've heard, APD says it's Balloon Fiesta says it's APD, so I want to know from you, who do you say it is?
Mr. President and Councilor, APD obviously does the logistics on the routes working with DMD. However, for the most part, it's been our conversation with the Balloon Fiesta that they designate where they'd like to have the rideshare located. And so to some extent, it's a little of both. We try and accommodate where Balloon Fiesta would like the rideshare to be through the routes that we're planning. And unfortunately, sometimes they don't work as well as we like.
And Mr. President, Mr. Rael, I'm happy to help on this one too. I think that what I was talking about earlier and learning about earlier, actually, when I was listening, is I think that it sounds like there's a way to make this work. And I was talking to President Smith with Balloon Fiesta, so he was unaware of some of the challenges. So I think that this is one of those, maybe the lack of communication or miscommunication. And if there's some way to make it work, it sounds to me like rideshare is starting to just boycott doing any kind of driving to and from Balloon Fiesta, which is a problem for those people who want to get transportation there, whether they have to or want to choose that private transportation. They're not able to get it. And then apparently they're waiting 12, 15 times. They're getting declined repeatedly. Mm-hmm. So it's really not faster. It's actually leaving them out in the lurch, similar to the bus route. So however I can help with that, but I think that if we start this conversation, I'm hoping that even by the end of the week, we can arrange something. But if not, we can definitely, I really hope to work to improve that for next year. But I'm gonna hold my breath, because by the end of the week, I'm hoping, or even in the next day or two, I'm hoping we can make it work.
And Mr. President and Councilor Bassan, I might just add, I asked our folks to get the information from the young man that was here, just to see what his experiences are and what recommendations they might have from their perspective in terms of working on this issue as well.
Perfect. I have some of those, and I've been in contact with him. I'd love for us to loop together on that so that we can all not be doing our own individual thing, but doing it together, please. And thank you.
All right, we'll move on to Councilor Pena. Question.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's more of a comment. I just wanted to really thank Director Ruiz Angel from ACS. I know you went out to a neighborhood, or your members went out to the neighborhood to talk to people. There were some gunshots for like 5 days in a row, like 60 plus rounds. And unfortunately, on the last day, a young man was murdered there. But I appreciate you going out and talking to the neighbors, because that was really important. And I know APD went and picked up a bunch of casings. So thank you for all your work on that. And I hope that gets you to some leads. Thank you.
All right, we'll move to approval of the journal. Vice President Lewis.
Mr. President, I move approval of the September 19th journal.
There's a second. And all those in favor of the September 19th journal, say yes. Yes. Opposed? That passes. We'll move on to communications and introductions. Changes to the letter of introduction. I move that the rules be suspended for the purpose of placing R72 on tonight's agenda for action. R72 is directing the city not approve any site plan for the low-density residential development at 3525 4th Street Northwest, known as the Brown property, that is inconsistent with what was proposed in the request for proposals process. This will require a 2/3 vote. There's a motion and a second. And all those in favor say yes and raise your hands. Yes? Opposed?
I just had a question. I just was wondering, are we going to go over this later?
Yeah, that's the intent.
Okay, got it. Okay. Then I'm a yes for it.
Anyone opposed? Okay, that passes. We'll move to Councilor Lewis.
Mr. President, I move that the rules be suspended for the purpose of introducing 047, placing on the November 7th council agenda for final action.
And there's a second from Councilor Bassan. Councilor Fablecorn.
Mr. President, is this in our iPads? I have not been able to find 047.
Mr. President, as a proposed late introduction, it was not included on the iPads when the iPads were uploaded on Friday. We are in the process of getting it to you.
Okay,
now.
you're handing it to us physically right now.
I'm sorry.
You're going to hand it to us physically right now. And then we're going to vote on whether we want to accept it without having a chance to read it?
Mr. President, Councilor Fablecorn, we do not have copies, but we're currently uploading it to your iPad if you'd like to look at it there. The motion, just to clarify, is not to make any action on it tonight, only to accept it onto the letter. If this motion fails, it can automatically be accepted to the letter of introduction on October 17th.
Right, which is the normal process for these things. When things don't get into the iPad on Friday for a letter of introduction, generally it would be on the next letter of introduction, not an immediate action like this.
Mr. President, Councilor Fablecorn, that is correct. I don't think the request for tonight, though, is for immediate action. It's only for introduction and holdover.
Thank you.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Any other questions? For a late introduction on 047. All those in, correct? Councilor Davis.
Mr. President, I just want to follow and just ask if there's if the sponsor can tell us why this needs a late intro and a holdover instead of a normal order. This seems like a pretty standard thing. We have as I understand, again, I don't see it either, like we have a study in place, we have a pilot project in place. We haven't gotten any of that data, but this seems to be ending that project and making decisions on what we do next. So it sidesteps the ordinance that's in place, the process in place now. So,
Mr. President, Yeah, this is, there is a time period on it, and really if you, and the whole idea is to give it plenty of time so that there is plenty of time to, when the, I mean, the original ordinance will expire at a certain time, and so the, I guess the time period really, by introducing it now, give us some time, it really is so that we can honor that deadline that's in place to be able to do something else with the ordinance there. And I would remind us that we just voted unanimously to place R-72 on the, we suspended the rules, put on tonight's agenda for final action. So, I mean, this is certainly within our ability to do so if we choose to, so.
Thanks, Mr. President. We don't have to debate this today. I just don't think this is in sort of normal order for us. That other bill was published. Folks have a chance to look at it and can argue with it. This does an awful lot. It undoes some things that we worked for years, for some of us to work on the pilot project. We haven't gotten any data from it. And then I assume by the title does at least 4 different things by directing and changing transit operations. That seems like a lot to do in a month. Outside of the normal budget cycle and the hearing cycle. So I just don't think we need a late intro. If the sponsor wants to push it, I think we can do it through normal order and allow the administration to weigh in. So,
Mr. President, we could debate this tonight. Our staff could talk about it. We could do the whole thing. But I would point out that we didn't debate the suspension of the rules on the previous bill before we voted on that. I mean, it's just simply a matter of process, and we're not voting on this tonight. We're not deciding on anything tonight. We're not even. It's not even up for final action tonight, which the previous bill is up for final action tonight. And so this is following a different process, and if we want to have the debate, we can certainly have the debate.
All right, any other discussion? There's a motion and a second to suspend the rules for a late introduction on 047. All those in favor say yes and raise your hand. Opposed? And that passes on a 6-3 vote. We will move now to Vice President Lewis.
Mr. President, I move approval of the letter of introduction.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor say yes. Yes. Anyone opposed? And we'll move on to reports from committees. There are none. Any deferrals or withdrawals at this time, councilors? Seeing none, we'll move to the consent agenda. Any changes to the consent agenda? Seeing none. Vice President Lewis.
Mr. President, move approval of the consent agenda.
There's a motion and a second from Councilor Bassan to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? And that passes. We'll move to announcements. Councilor Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. President. There will be a Public Safety Committee meeting on Tuesday, October 11th at 5 p.m. in the Council Committee Room on the 9th floor.
Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. There will be a Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee meeting on Wednesday, October 12th at 5 p.m. in the Council Committee Room on the 9th floor.
And Councilor Feeblecorn.
Thank you, Mr. President. There will be an Intergovernmental Relations Committee meeting tomorrow, October 4th at 3 p.m. via Zoom video conference.
Thank you. We have no public hearings tonight, and we have nothing on the approval sections of the agenda. We will move to other business, and we've moved this up, councilors and the public, from what was published on the agenda, but we know there's a lot of interest in this. This is EC 145, the veto of R2265, directing the Department of Family Community Services to redesignate funds designated for safe outdoor spaces to use to support homeless, near homeless, or precariously housed veterans